Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here, and it's time for a retrospective of the 2014-2015 Oscar season. It's a year where we had some of the most brutal nomination snubs, and it's a year with a very tight, very unique Best Picture race between Boyhood and Birdman. Two very unconventional Oscar contenders, two great movies, I think. We're gonna get into the acting categories, we're gonna get into the text, but first we're gonna start off with this race. Our story begins back in 2002 when Richard Linklater decided that he wanted to make a movie about growing up, and what better way to make this movie than over the course of the next 12 years. He did what no filmmaker before him had done and made a narrative feature film where we actually watch the actors age as the characters age. Linklater actually wrote the movie throughout production, so every year after they looked at the footage that they just shot, he and the actors would sort of determine where this story would go next, and once this 12-year-long project premiered at Sundance, it was met with rave reviews across the board. The movie allowed its audience to reflect on the passage of time, our relationship with memories, our inescapable tie to the present in ways that they hadn't been able to before because of the unique format and structure of this movie. I think it started out with like a 93 on Metacritic, and then up until its July release date, it just crept up to a 100, and now it has a 100, and it's the highest rated movie on Metacritic of all time. In a lot of ways, this movie feels like the culmination of everything Richard Linklater had done up to this point. Similar to the director's other work, like Dazed and Confused, it sort of follows like a type B protagonist just kind of meandering their way through life, and it tries to find the beauty of those little everyday moments. The Before trilogy also kind of experimented with time, and like Waking Life, we get moments where the characters are sort of searching for a greater purpose. I guess working against the movie, a summer release date, it's not common that movies that get released that early win Best Picture. And it's also not the baitiest movie around. I mean, there's barely any conflict, there's no real antagonist, and being the most critically acclaimed movie of all time, it of course had a built-in target on its back, because if you don't think that the movie's like the best movie of the year hands down, you're like, oh, it's a little overrated. And even I thought on first watch, I was like, that was a very good movie. I don't know if it was like the best movie of the year. And then I rewatched it just last week, and I think that the movie's a masterpiece. And I'm not even that surprised that I have a different take on the movie, considering that I have aged. I think it's a movie that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think the fact that it was so personal to many is why it was able to be the frontrunner for so long. By the time the fall festivals were over, I don't think that anybody had a clear idea of what the runner-up would be. So Boyhood was almost just the default. And for a long time, it just affirmed itself as the frontrunner. It was sweeping critics groups. It started winning the Golden Globes, the Critics' Choice Awards. It was sweeping picture, directing, and supporting actress awards everywhere. Birdman premiered at Venice, followed up with Telluride, and didn't go to TIFF, because TIFF didn't accept Birdman. Makes no sense, but it's a fun fact. The movie was met with rave reviews, praise for the writing, directing, performances, especially the cinematography. It has an insanely ambitious style, the one-take illusion, executed by none other than one of the world's greatest cinematographers, Emmanuel Lubezki. And it wasn't just a stylistic piece, it was really witty and thought-provoking. It was consistently one of the highest performers in terms of its nomination tally. It was getting directing, writing nominations everywhere. 3 actors getting nominated everywhere. Tech awards. And I guess that really did make it like a top 3 contender. Winning Screenplay awards was a really good sign for Birdman, because people didn't know if they needed to do that for Boyhood, and Birdman was kind of the alternative, winning the Golden Globe and Critics' Choice Award for Screenplay. But after it lost the Comedy Golden Globe to the Grand Budapest Hotel, and after Michael Keaton started becoming less of a sure thing to win Best Actor, which people thought he would in the beginning, it didn't really look like Birdman was going to win Best Picture after all. Another really good sign for Birdman, though, was winning SAG. I mean, it kind of made sense. It had 3 acting nominations. It had a bunch of other performances that were really good. Didn't really feel like Boyhood would win SAG Ensemble. But like we've seen with Coda and Spotlight and Parasite in the years since, you can't really underestimate a SAG winner, because then it goes on and wins PGA. And this was a shock. I don't really know what the moment was that voters said, we're getting tired of Boyhood. We want an alternative, and we all know what that is. I don't know how that happened or what the shift was, but it turned out that Birdman was the alternate option for people who felt Boyhood was just like a little overrated and they're maybe a little sick of seeing it win everything and having 100 on Metacritic since July. Although in a way it makes a lot of sense that the movie was such a strong contender because it's a movie about the entertainment industry. It's a movie about actors. It's a critique of artists and their egos, which I'm sure is something that many members of the Academy can relate to. It's a very bold and in-your-face, like, artistic statement. And I think that when you stand out like that, people might gravitate towards you. People were debating like what the movie meant and what the ending was really about. In a way, the movie feels relevant to a world where it feels easier than ever to cultivate an online persona. And again, the intense desire to be loved and immortalized through your art, I think maybe really resonated with Academy members. Birdman won the PGA, won DGA, which was also an award that people thought would be Linklaters. But Boyhood was still strong enough to go on and win at the BAFTAs. Very similar, I think, to Roma and Power of the Dog, movies that lost PGA and then went on to still win the BAFTA, but then lose the Oscar because that steam, that momentum that they lost is not coming back. The night of the Oscars, it actually felt like it could go either way. Maybe Birdman was just a Guilds thing and the Oscars would go along with the BAFTAs and everybody else. Maybe they would split awards. Like, what if Linklater wins director and Birdman wins Best Picture? Or vice versa, because it felt like, we want to give Iñárritu his flowers, but we also really want to give Linklater his flowers. But, I guess the shows of the Oscars don't really care to spread the love like that because they left Wes Anderson and Linklater empty-handed. Iñárritu got screenplay and director and picture. So what happened here? What are the lessons that we can learn? Give me the reason, you demand. I think the simple explanation is the correct one. Birdman and Boyhood were both really well-liked, original, thought-provoking films that touched audiences in different ways. But people got tired of the Boyhood run. We've been hearing about Boyhood ever since Sundance. We watched it in the summer. We heard about how it was the best movie ever the entire year. And then the critics groups were all giving it the awards. We got a little tired of it. It's frontrunner fatigue. And I think what was also detrimental was the fact that Boyhood didn't really have a strong sense of structure. It was a very meandering movie, and it didn't have a strong central conflict. Again, those are things that I think make the movie great. As far as an awards-ready movie goes, it wasn't really Oscar bait. Birdman, as weird as it was, I think was more Oscar bait in terms of the fact that it appealed to artists, that the cinematography was and the filmmaking was so showy, that the writing was showy. Boyhood was a little bit more timid, and Birdman ultimately had a really good case to win screenplay and director. I think it's sad that Linklater couldn't also get an Oscar, and it's hard to imagine when, if at all, he could even get an Oscar in the future. But like I said, I think that these movies are both masterpieces, and I can't really complain about either one winning awards. So what were the other contenders this year? Well, the Grand Budapest Hotel came out in March. It premiered at the Berlin Film Festival in February, and it became the most acclaimed Wes Anderson film that he'd ever made. The movie was on a whole new level technically from anything else he'd ever done, especially the stunning production design throughout the whole movie. Wes Anderson took his own Wes Anderson-ness up to an 11. But outside of nominating Wes Anderson for some screenplay awards and an animated feature award, the Academy didn't really go for Wes Anderson movies. And even Moonrise Kingdom in 2012, that came pretty close to getting Best Picture, but only got a screenplay. So Wes Anderson just felt like a filmmaker that at this time the Academy is just not gonna fully embrace. And why would this year be any different when the movie came out early in the year? But when critics would make their top 10s at the end of the year, Wes Anderson was there. And when the critics groups would do their nominations, Wes Anderson was showing up. It even got a SAG Ensemble nomination, and people thought, well, that's pretty normal. It has literally everybody who works in Hollywood in it, so that's fine. The suspicion that it would get nominated started to creep up. The nominations for the Critics' Choice and Golden Globe Awards were the day after each other. The Grand Budapest Hotel came on very strongly when those two happened. The greatest indication that this movie was a major contender was Wes Anderson getting director at the Golden Globes, which barely anybody was predicting on Gold Derby. He was in the woods. He was down there. People just did not think that was going to happen. And then Critics' Choice nominated for everything, and it's oh, this is a top 5 contender. And at the end of it, I think that this movie was number 3 for Best Picture. It won 4 awards. It was probably the runner-up for screenplay. It got 9 nominations, got director everywhere, got nominated everywhere. It's a great example of a movie that doesn't seem like it's trying to get Oscars and comes out really early in the year and then people just love it so much that it has to get nominations. And kind of like Boyhood, it was an example of a filmmaker who had been nominated in Screenplay, really well respected in the industry for years, but considered to be doing like their own thing that the Academy wouldn't embrace, and then they do. The Imitation Game, I think, was number 4 for Best Picture, possibly number 3. This was just classic commercial Weinstein Oscar bait. It's a World War II unsung hero movie, tailor-made for the People's Choice Award at Toronto Film Festival. It's a nail-biting crowd pleaser, a fascinating character study, and it checks all the boxes for an Oscar movie. I actually think that this is an example of very good Oscar bait. It has so much going for it, like the urgency of the story, the importance of Alan Turing and his legacy, and just how fascinating he was as a human being. It celebrates his mind and it mourns the ways in which the world was unkind to him. Movie won the People's Choice. Did lead people to think, is this a movie that could win Best Picture? But I think it was just too few people's absolute number 1 favorite of the year. It racked up 9 Oscar nominations in pretty much every category it possibly could have, and it even won Adapted Screenplay. Another classic Oscar bait film about a British genius is The Theory of Everything. Now, I won't defend this movie the way that I would defend The Imitation Game. I do think it's a well-made movie and it has great performances, but it ultimately kind of winds up falling short of having much to say about Stephen Hawking. It does justice to his life and to his relationship. I think it's a good movie, but I felt like by the end of it, it was kind of just like a shrug. However, this was a really, really buzzy fall festival movie, and it was getting the waterworks going for people, especially the romantics in the crowd. They were having a great time. I remember feeling unsure if this would be a Best Picture player because the reviews weren't the strongest, but you can't really deny a movie that has Best Actor and Best Actress hype. If you got a generally good, agreeable, baity movie, it just gets in. And I think that's what happened with The Theory of Everything. And interestingly, The Theory of Everything, The Imitation Game, Grand Budapest Hotel, Boyhood, and Birdman, these were the only movies nominated at every major precursor, including SAG. This was the SAG lineup, these 5. It was also the BAFTA lineup. So the SAG lineup and the BAFTA lineup matched perfectly. I don't think that's ever happened. And The Theory of Everything had no right to get a SAG Ensemble nomination, let's be honest. So this was clearly your top 5. If the Oscars only had 5 nominees, I think it would have been this 5. Whiplash premiered along with Boyhood at the Sundance Film Festival, and it really tore the roof off the place. People loved this movie, and it won the Audience Award and the Jury Prize. There wasn't a ton of immediate Oscar buzz for the movie outside of J.K. Simmons, who was so obviously a supporting actor contender. It's about an obsessed drummer from a director who is really breaking onto the scene with his movie. So not a lot about it seemed like Oscar bait really, but it just maintained and gained buzz throughout the year. And at the end of the year, when this movie actually came out, people were just freaking out and loving the movie to death. The buzz only got stronger as the year rolled along. The buzz for J.K. Simmons to win was really high, and then people were like, okay, screenplay probably. And then it just kind of started creeping into categories let's get this an editing nomination. Are you joking? And then sound mixing. And then, of course, when you have all those ingredients, you have a Best Picture nominee. Again, not really a movie that was trying to get Oscar nominations, but it's just so riveting, intense, well made, and it has a stunning ending. The movie also invites a lot of debate from its viewers. It really lets you have your own takeaway. Even if you watch clips on YouTube of the movie, people will be debating whether or not the movie was a happy ending for Neiman, because he gets what he wants. He works so hard to achieve it, and isn't that what the American dream is about? But, whether or not you think that is worth it for the character, I feel clearly fucking no, he had to sacrifice everything. But people will still debate this on YouTube or anywhere where people are talking about the movie, because the movie lets you get away with having different interpretations or maybe even the wrong interpretation. And I feel that's what makes the movie great. It made Critics' Choice and PGA lineups. It wasn't really making top 5 lineups. It didn't make BAFTA or Golden Globe drama. And it's kind of crazy that this movie won 3 Oscars. I think it's an all-timer in the categories that it did win too. American Sniper really came crashing into the race at the last minute. Chris Kyle took a rocket launcher and just shot that thing into the wall of the Academy on Oscar morning. Bradley Cooper and Clint Eastwood just stormed the building. We've seen before when it's October and Clint Eastwood's oh, hey guys, guess what? I have a movie coming out, by the way, thanks. And that's what this was. People didn't even really have it on their radars for most of the year. It premiered at AFI Fest, got good reviews, but nothing so extraordinary that I was like, okay, this is a no-brainer. I kind of thought, all right, well, let's keep an eye out for American Sniper, and then it gets like, in the 70s on Metacritic, and it's like, okay, seems like that's not going to get nominated then. But the campaign was strong for this movie, and it was building up steam very, very late. It came out in limited release on Christmas. This movie didn't get any Golden Globe nominations. This movie did not get a single Critics' Choice nomination outside of action movie. It did not get any SAG nominations. But then it starts getting shit from the guilds. It gets PGA, gets DGA, which is like a major red flag. And I guess this was also a pretty good sign that it got an adapted screenplay nomination at BAFTA. So there were like enough breadcrumbs that you could definitely draw a trail to the Oscars. And it did. It broke into the Best Picture race. It broke into the Best Actor race. Literally nobody nominated Bradley Cooper. The Oscars fucking loved this movie way more than anybody was anticipating. And you gotta keep in mind that this was before the movie came out in wide release and started smashing box office records, which I even forgot. In my head, I was like, oh yeah, well, American Sniper came out and it did numbers at the box office and then people knew it was happening. No. And this one was a very controversial pick. A lot of people didn't really like it. I didn't really like it that much. Critic reviews and everything were generally positive, but there was a little bit of a debate as to whether or not the movie was like pro-war. Eastwood has stated that he did not intend to make this a pro-war movie. I think the intention of the movie was probably to show the impact that it had on a specific soldier. If it's not trying to be pro-war or it's not trying to be military propaganda, then maybe it wasn't like the most careful with the way that it approached that, because you do leave the movie thinking like, Chris Kyle, what a fucking hero, like killed 100 people. Great guy. Although maybe you could argue we should celebrate the veterans, but not the war. There's really very little worth celebrating about the Iraq war. And so when you celebrate a guy that like did the most damage with a single gun, it's like a little weird. And I also agree with the arguments that it didn't do enough to show the morally gray areas of war. Like, for example, Letters from Iwo Jima, which I think did that really well. The Iraqis in the movie are kind of like this faceless, evil enemy. The movie kind of draws a straight line between the events of 9/11 and then the necessity to go to war to do something about it, when in fact invading Iraq didn't really make sense and was obviously built on lies. And for sure, Chris Kyle's perspective was that is the reason that he was there, so maybe the movie's trying to show that, but I don't think that it does very much to dispel that for anybody. You could pretty easily walk away from the movie feeling like everything was totally justified. Chris Kyle, out of his 100 plus kills, definitely didn't kill any innocent people whatsoever, for sure. It's also weird that the movie like makes up this villain that drills holes into children's heads, even though that didn't happen. It's like, why are you doing this? Oh yeah, you just need to make the bad guys as movie bad guy-y as possible. And there's also the controversy about like Chris Kyle as a human being. He lied in his memoir about shooting looters during Hurricane Katrina. There was like no evidence to back this up, and it was just like, what kind of person are you that you like brag about this? I don't know. I mean, all I know is that this was one of the few Best Picture nominees I've seen that I didn't really like. Its legacy as a nominee is very questionable, and despite Eastwood's intentions, I mean, the massive box office showing for this movie, I think, was people going out and watching what they thought was like a patriotic movie celebrating the military. Selma has a little bit of an interesting tale around it. It entered the awards season very late, but it was such a late bloomer that it had some issues, especially with its SAG screeners. The movie ended up with no nominations at SAG, but it was kind of like a fear not. They did not receive the movie. If they had, perhaps it would have received a SAG Ensemble nomination or a Best Actor nomination. And it was nominated very nicely at the Golden Globes and the Critics' Choice Awards. And critics groups were also kind of on board giving this movie picture, director, and Best Actor nominations in particular. However, its performance at the Guilds was kind of devastating for it. It missed PGA and DGA, which there was really no screener excuse that you could come up with. Like, it just missed those nominations. So where it would perform on Oscar morning was pretty questionable. People still were predicting that Oyelowo would get into Best Actor. I mean, he was playing like Martin Luther King, so like, how do you not nominate that? And then people thought it would get director. People thought Ava DuVernay was going to be the first Black woman ever nominated in the category. But then one of the headlines of Oscar morning is that Selma gets like a measly 2 nominations. And I guess luckily, like, one of the nominations was Best Picture. And then the other one was probably like the least significant other nomination that you could possibly get that has so very little to do with like the actual quality of the movie overall, like Best Song. It was probably the weakest best picture package that any movie had gotten since like the 30s, with like Grand Hotel getting only best picture. It was pretty shocking, and a lot of people were pretty outraged because this was like the one non-all-white movie in contention, and the Oscars just barely recognize it. This is what started the Oscars So White hashtag, because all the nominees were white. David Oyelowo being widely expected to get in definitely contributed to that. At the premiere of Selma, the cast and crew protested the killing of Eric Garner, and Oyelowo says that members of the Academy were calling up the producers like, how dare they do this? We're not going to vote for this movie because we don't think it's their place to do that. Even though literally like the message of the movie is like the importance of continuing the fight and how it's not over. Oyelowo says they use their privilege to deny a film on the basis of what they valued in the world. Next in line for Best Picture, if there was 9, and I remember being surprised that there was only 8, but if there were 9, I think it would have been Foxcatcher. I don't think I would have said that before the nominations, but after the nominations, it was pretty clear what the Academy was digging. Foxcatcher premiered at Cannes with rave reviews, seemed like a really huge contender. I remember thinking that it was going to get nominated for absolutely everything across the board. You have actors in prosthetics playing real life people. This is Bennett Miller's 3rd film. His first 2 were both nominated for Best Picture. But after watching the movie, I actually lost confidence in it, because although like Capote and Moneyball, it is part biopic, it is partly a sports movie, it is so slow, dark, and brooding. It's like an extremely cold movie. Let's just say it made sense that this movie premiered at Cannes and not at like Toronto. And it performed very inconsistently throughout the season. Did very well at the Golden Globes, made the 5 for drama, but it missed the Critics' Choice 10. It was really on the edge for Best Screenplay, Picture, and Best Actor because they weren't getting in everywhere. It looked like the minimum this movie would get was makeup and supporting actor for Mark Ruffalo. But on Oscar morning, the movie surprises in a lot of categories, particularly Best Actor, Best Screenplay, and most shockingly, Best Director. I'll talk more about Bennett Miller's nomination because that was like one of the most shocking Best Director nominees I've ever seen in my life. And yet, like, it misses Best Picture. The movie probably had the best haul any movie has gotten that missed Best Picture since the lineup was expanded. If I had to take a stab at what I thought number 10 was for picture, I think it was Nightcrawler. I remember predicting that this would get into Best Picture. It premiered at TIFF and got really solid reviews. A lot of buzz for Jake Gyllenhaal, but people didn't even really think that he was going to get nominated for a while until he actually got that Golden Globe nomination, kind of like Wes Anderson in director. People weren't quite predicting him. Even for Critics' Choice, he was like on the fence for people. But Jake Gyllenhaal like becomes undeniable as the season goes on. It was a movie that everybody really loved. It was dark in like a really fun way. And Lou Bloom was just such a memorable and endlessly watchable protagonist. It was getting screenplay nominations pretty much everywhere. It got PGA, Critics' Choice nominations, and even right before the Oscars, the final precursor at the BAFTAs, it did really well. It didn't get picture director, but it got screenplay, editing, actor, and supporting actress for Rene Russo. To me, the movie was looking like it might overperform on Oscar morning. But then Nightcrawler gets only screenplay, and Jake Gyllenhaal is omitted in one of the most insane Best Actor snubs that's ever occurred. Ultimately, I think that the Oscars has a bias against thrillers, and the next movie also proves that. Gone Girl, I think, was number 11. Due to David Fincher being behind it, the movie had a lot of buzz out of the gate. It premiered at New York Film Festival, and guess what? It met the very high expectations. Maybe it wasn't getting like a 90 on Metacritic, it wasn't getting like social network reviews, but it was doing probably better than Girl with the Dragon Tattoo did, and that still got a lot of nominations. The movie did seem iffy for Best Picture for a long time. It got Critics' Choice and PGA, but it seemed like with the Oscars not having a guaranteed 10 that it would probably sit out. However, it looked like it would probably perform similar to Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. You have another Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross score that you could nominate. Rosamund Pike was just in there. She was undeniable. She was a lock. The screenplay looked like it was nearly a lock at this time. It looked like it could get a sound nomination. Maybe it would get editing because Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and Social Network both won editing. So why wouldn't this movie get nominated for editing too? 4 Golden Globe nominations, 6 Critics' Choice nominations, 2 BAFTA nominations, and yet only 1 Oscar nomination, which was nuts. Like, especially the screenplay snub. I mean, that movie got nominated literally everywhere for screenplay, including the Golden Globes 5. And it's a shame, I think, that the Academy went for a couple really safe traditional movies like American Sniper and Theory of Everything over stuff like Nightcrawler or Gone Girl. Again, I think the movie just suffered from genre. It was too much of a thriller, it was too much of a mystery, and they don't like those movies. The last major outside shot contender, I think, was Unbroken. People thought all year long this would be like a no-brainer. The subject of this movie is a former Olympian who became a prisoner of war and survived miracle events, and he was inspiring as fuck, and it was a Christmas movie. And this is one of those instances where, because a movie does not have the strongest reviews, it does benefit from dropping like right before nominations start happening, where it's very fresh for people. And so right out of the gate, this movie got National Board of Review, AFI Top 10, and Critics' Choice nominations, including in like director. People thought that this would be a Golden Globes contender as well, mainly because Angelina Jolie and the Golden Globes liking actor directors and their A-list celebrities, but it was not nominated anywhere at the Golden Globes. So the question was like, is this an extremely loud and incredibly close Blindside kind of movie where the Critics' Choice liked it, but nobody else really did, but it was still surprised in the Oscar race just from being such bait? But really the movie got what it was supposed to, which was cinematography and sound nominations. Interstellar was pretty big. It got 5 tech nominations, but it wasn't really ever close to making it for Best Picture, because despite the love from audiences on this movie, critics, and I guess, industry members too, sort of question like how well the movie's emotional side came across, and like if it really communicated the love transcending time message very well, because Matthew McConaughey kind of just explains the movie to you as he's like flying through like the dimension. Ultimately, I think when you're a genre film, you can't afford to have those kind of mixed reactions, and that's what happened with Interstellar. Best Director, very similar to Best Picture. Linklater won everything except for the DGA and the Oscar. In a lot of ways it makes sense that the director who's doing the one-take movie that's winning cinematography gets director, but in another way it makes sense that the director who has never won an Oscar, who does a movie over 12 years like nobody's ever seen, could win the Oscar too. Birdman and Boyhood both have some kind of gimmick that makes the experience of watching them feel wholly unique. Wes Anderson was nominated everywhere for Grand Budapest Hotel. And then Morton Tildum getting in is a little weird. I am a fan of the movie, as I said, but I feel like there's not that much of like a directorial vision behind the movie. It's just very well produced Oscar bait. I feel like he didn't need the nomination, and it didn't look like he was gonna get it up until DGA. And there were a lot of other options that you could have gone for here. But Morton Tildum wasn't the only surprise in the category. Bennett Miller was like the biggest shock. I couldn't have been more surprised. I couldn't have expected to see his name less. I think it was even more shocking than like Vinterberg getting in for another round, because people were kind of anticipating like, yeah, the director's branch could do that. Bennett Miller, aside from winning the Cannes Best Director Award, literally did not get nominated for anything. No critics group nominated him for director. Nobody gave him anything. And yet he sneaks in for the Oscar, and his movie doesn't even get Best Picture. In a way, I guess it's somewhat fitting for the director's branch, because it was like a very tightly crafted movie with a very strong sense of atmosphere. And I don't hate that the nomination happened. I feel like he does deserve it. But boy, it was one of the biggest surprises I've ever seen in this category. And it was especially surprising because I had a few people in mind when I was watching the nominees who I was wondering if they would get in there. Clint Eastwood for American Sniper got DGA. I think a lot of people expected that if American Sniper were to perform really well on Oscar morning, that Clint Eastwood would shove himself in there. And it was a little bit surprising that he didn't, honestly, with the haul that the movie got. And then Ava DuVernay was kind of the big headliner director snub. She got in at Golden Globe and Critics' Choice. Damien Chazelle got a BAFTA nomination for Whiplash, which was very surprising. The movie did not show up in Best Film at BAFTA. So I was looking out to see if they would maybe nominate him, since the movie was having like a really strong run. I also looked at the James Marsh BAFTA nomination and thought like he could get in. David Fincher for Gone Girl, he did get Golden Globe and Critics' Choice, but I think right before the Oscars, it really didn't feel like he was going to get nominated. He was DGA nominated for Dragon Tattoo, and he didn't even get that. But yeah, even just looking at this now, I'm like kind of baffled that with all these maybe contenders down here, Morton Tildum and Bennett Miller were the ones to rise above. Best Actress, this was just a classic case of an overdue actor having their time. This was Julianne Moore's 5th Oscar nomination. It was the only nomination for the movie, which after it premiered at TIFF had instant like, Julianne Moore, this is your year, give her the Oscar kind of buzz, despite the fact that before this premiered at TIFF, barely anybody was talking about it. Think Glenn Close and The Wife, but actually it happening and playing through the entire season. In the short span of 1997 to 2002, Julianne Moore got nominated for 4 Oscars, including 2 in the same year in 2002. And I'm sure that after that point, it really felt like, okay, when are we going to see Julianne Moore get her Oscar? Any day now. And yet, the roles didn't really happen for her for a while. And still, Alice was like the perfect opportunity to do it. She plays a woman with early onset Alzheimer's. And although, yes, it's a career Oscar, and yes, they gave it to her in part because of all the amazing work that she's done beforehand, we shouldn't downplay this performance. I think it's really excellent, and I think it was an Oscar-worthy performance. A lot of people feel like Rosamund Pike was the best performance of 2014, and, that may be, but I don't even know if I would personally say that she was more deserving than Julianne Moore. She didn't really have much competition because Rosamund Pike, although she was incredible and was able to withstand all of the Gone Girl snubbage, the fact that that movie did underperform like it did, I don't think she was anywhere really close to actually winning. Reese Witherspoon already won, and then Felicity Jones and Marion Cotillard were just happy to be there. This was really one of those years where 4 slots were basically guaranteed. They got nominated everywhere, and the 5th slot was chaos. People didn't really know where they were going to look for that 5th nominee, but the Golden Globes, the Critics' Choice, and SAG all suggested the same thing. They said Jennifer Aniston for Cake, which was the kind of movie that nobody had really seen. It wasn't that acclaimed outside of just praise for Jennifer Aniston and her finally doing like a really big dramatic role. She just missed the BAFTA, which went to Amy Adams for Big Eyes. A lot of people did think that Amy Adams was going to end up being the 5th slot here too. She did win the Golden Globe comedy, but again, Jennifer Aniston in Cake was just getting the nominations and not Amy Adams. In hindsight, it feels like the Jennifer Aniston in Cake thing was just like a weird thing of the moment. Like the second she wasn't nominated, that movie just kind of disappeared into the ether. But the Oscars, they went with a little more of a highbrow critics pick here with that 5th slot, pulling somebody who got nominated from Critics' Choice and who was also doing really well with critics. And that was Marion Cotillard in 2 Days, One Night, who gives a very restrained performance in a Dardenne Brothers movie. It's a French language performance. It was a good opportunity for the Academy to nominate Cotillard after her Oscar win. And they did snub her for Rust and Bone a couple of years earlier. And outside of those people, there wasn't really any other major contenders. Best Actor. This is the most interesting acting race of all, and the only one that wasn't just unanimous and obvious. Although it was pretty obvious who was going to win, the night of. So this is a very controversial and hotly debated Best Actor race. Michael Keaton started out the season really strong and looking like he was going to win for Birdman. Right after the movie premiered, it is a role literally tailor-made for him. In a lot of ways, the role is very meta, and I think all of that plays into a nice narrative for Michael Keaton, which is like his comeback narrative. Because for a while now, Michael Keaton had been sort of out of the picture, peaking in the 80s and 90s, and this role was giving him critical recognition like he'd never received before. He got to use his comedic chops, his dramatic chops, and it put Michael Keaton back in the spotlight in a huge way, and it even resulted in a career resurgence for him that is still going on to this day. Michael Keaton was far out front with critics groups. In fact, the second place winner in terms of critics groups was Jake Gyllenhaal, not even Eddie Redmayne. Keaton went on to win the Critics' Choice Award. He won the Golden Globe Award for comedy. And at that time, it didn't really seem like there was an obvious runner-up. But I remember at the Golden Globes kind of looking to that drama category and saying like, okay, Michael Keaton's over here, so who are they going to go with over here? That's probably the runner-up. And as many suspected, it was Eddie Redmayne. It raised an eyebrow. And when it came time for the SAG Awards, there were a lot of people thinking that they were going to shift over. Because Eddie Redmayne certainly had the most Oscar baity performance in the lineup. It was a full body transformation into a beloved figure. And in retrospect, maybe it was foolish to ever think that Michael Keaton had the Oscar in hand when he was up against this. And we know that the Oscars love when you're playing real life people. And on the campaign trail, Eddie Redmayne came off as very charming, and he spoke a lot about how much preparation he did for this role. He worked with a dialect coach, a choreographer. He did months of research. He read and watched every little bit of Stephen Hawking content that he could find. I mean, it was an extremely difficult performance to pull off. He had to play Stephen Hawking through like a dozen different stages of his disability, acting through all these layers of physical and vocal work. I personally think that he did like a really amazing job. I don't really know why people have a problem with the win other than, yeah, you wanted Michael Keaton to win. Like, I'm pretty mixed on the movie overall, but I thought Eddie Redmayne was pretty astonishing in the movie. And I don't know why people criticize the performance. Like, I don't know what else you wanted from somebody playing Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking also gave this movie and Eddie Redmayne's performance like his full endorsement and said that at times it felt like he was watching himself. And it also looked good for Eddie Redmayne to have Stephen Hawking like on this movie's side. So you had like the most Beatty biopic transformation thing going on over here. And then with Michael Keaton, what you had was career narrative and also a really good performance. And Eddie Redmayne really didn't have much of a career narrative at all. This was like a major breakout for him. And he was in his early 30s. Like, there was nothing else that they're giving him the Oscar for other than this one performance. So I guess if you want to break this race down, it's narrative versus most acting. And in this case, most acting prevailed. In retrospect, it's a little bit weird that with all the Birdman hype that Michael Keaton didn't like go along with that. But again, you know, you can't really deny the performance that is the most acting. And we even saw that last year with Tammy Faye. Steve Carell was patchy with the precursors. Like, he did get the Golden Globe drama. He even got the SAG nomination, which was pretty important. But at the BAFTAs, he was in supporting along with Mark Ruffalo. Always weird to me that Steve Carell missed the Critics' Choice nomination for Foxcatcher. But ultimately, he was playing, you know, a real-life figure. And he had a hell of a narrative because Steve Carell went so much darker than anything that we'd seen from him before. He's very fucking creepy and scary in this performance and in all that makeup. And then Bradley Cooper in American Sniper. This is one of the most insane Best Actor inclusions because he did not get nominated literally anywhere. He had no major precursors. He just went along with the late game American Sniper hype. I mean, maybe if the SAG Awards weren't so early and they were like after PGA, they probably would have nominated him too. I mean, he barely got any nominations at all. He got like a couple critics groups for this movie. At the end of the day, it did seem like, oh God, I feel like this is possible because of the way that American Sniper was on the come up. But I did not believe that this was happening, and I was shocked that it happened, especially over who it happened to. This 5 was just not the lineup that anyone was expecting. I actually would stand by that Bradley Cooper was probably the best part of American Sniper because I really bought him, I guess, as what the movie was trying to sell me as to what Chris Kyle was like. I feel like Bradley Cooper for this role became like dumber and more like simple-minded, and he was like, I just gotta kill those Rockies. I just gotta go out there. It felt, I guess, real. It felt like authentic to me that his character was like that. So I do think Bradley Cooper was very good in American Sniper. I just wouldn't have nominated him. I mean, Jake Gyllenhaal, like, Jake Gyllenhaal, buddy, like, what were the Oscars thinking? This is probably the worst Best Actor snub of the last decade. I mean, for a while, it felt like we were lucky, you know, to have him actually seeming like he was going to get nominated because Out of Toronto, it didn't feel like the Oscars kind of movie. But once he got nominated everywhere, we're talking all the major precursors, it felt like there was a lot of buzz building around Jake Gyllenhaal and a lot of momentum for Nightcrawler too, which was getting like PGA nominations, lots of BAFTA nominations. I mean, he felt like a no-brainer at the end of the day. Even though he was iffy early on, it was like, it felt really solidified. And Lou Bloom is just one of the most compulsively watchable film protagonists of recent years. He was like this insane embodiment of like the dark side of the American dream where it's like, I am following the rules. I am hardworking and successing my way to the top. But it's like extremely scary and unsettling. And he never did any of it in a way where it felt like he was trying too hard. I have no explanation for you. I have nothing except for they didn't like Nightcrawler. And it's not even the only terrible snub that happened on Oscar morning. David Oyelowo absolutely nailed Martin Luther King. He's just such a well-known figure. It's like, who's going to do right to that performance? And David Oyelowo did all of that. There couldn't have been a better actor to portray Martin Luther King. He had lots of Oscar-friendly clips, for, like every single speech that he did. I would say that maybe a negative for the movie was that it switched perspectives a lot, so it was like half focused on MLK and then the other half was focused on all the other figures involved in this movement. But Steve Carell wasn't quite the protagonist of Foxcatcher even, and he still got nominated. And it is weird because it is the type of real person transformation that the Oscars love to see. And 4 out of 5 of the lineup was real people. So it was very weird that he wasn't nominated. Also on the outside was Ray Fiennes for the Grand Budapest Hotel. I feel like it would have been weird for him to get in over this top 7, but he did get Critics' Choice and BAFTA and Golden Globe comedy, so he got like quite a few of the precursors. Timothy Spall should have easily grunted and snorted his way to an Oscar nomination. Like, are you joking? The amount that he conveys with each grunt. I do not understand how the BAFTAs ignored Timothy Spall and how they ignored Mr. Turner overall, aside from like a couple tech nominations. It was an insane performance, and it just went so unrecognized. It was so unfair what happened to Timothy Spall. Best Supporting Actor, J.K. Simmons for Whiplash. J.K. Simmons had a fuck ton of buzz for this performance when it came out at Sundance. Before anybody even thought of screenplay or picture or editing or sound, he screams, he yells, and then he also has that key scene towards the end of the movie where he's talking to Miles Teller at the bar, and you really see that other side of him. I mean, I feel like it couldn't have been a more well-written character, and I feel like the shoes of this character could not have better been filled by anybody other than J.K. Simmons, who has been a long-time beloved character actor, but he had never shown the world this level of talent. I feel like this went far beyond what we were able to see from him, and he really gave us one of the most memorable performances of the last decade, I think. Compulsively watchable, terrifying, but also like very human. This performance had to win, and I think it's one of the all-time best wins in supporting actor. I think Edward Norton for Birdman was like the unspoken runner-up. If J.K. Simmons wasn't there, I feel like Edward Norton probably would have won. I also think Ethan Hawke was phenomenal in Boyhood, and if it were up to me to pick a runner-up, I probably would have chosen Ethan Hawke. Just another example of why that director-actor pairing is so perfect. Mark Ruffalo in Foxcatcher, kind of similar to what he did in like Spotlight. He has all these weird mannerisms that are, I guess, reflective of like the real person, where he like kind of changes the way that he walks and the way that he's postured, and he's like, yeah. And then the Academy's like, no brainer, nominate Mark Ruffalo. And these 4 seemed very obvious by the time that nominations started happening. It was really that 5th slot that was up in the air. And critics really were split on who they were going for. They were kind of going for Josh Brolin in Inherent Vice. Inherent Vice was a very, very divisive movie, and at the time, I really didn't like it, even though I had loved every other Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I guess I'm due to rewatch it and see if it holds up better, but let's just say like it was very clearly not Oscar bait. It was designed to be like annoyingly confusing. Josh Brolin was really good in it though. People thought maybe the Oscars would nominate Tim Roth or Tom Wilkinson from Selma, but that didn't end up taking off. Really what took off was Robert Duvall and The Judge. That was the performance that the Critics' Choice and the Golden Globes and the SAG all went for that 5th slot. And I've never seen The Judge, but I guess it kind of makes the most sense for like which performance fits Oscar nominated the best. It was the actor's 7th nomination and his first in 16 years. Patricia Arquette was the 3rd winner of the night to get the Oscar off of her first nomination. She hadn't really been that close to getting this kind of awards recognition in the past, but she had some memorable roles, mostly like in the 90s. And she was also really well known for Medium, which came out in the mid-2000s as a TV show. But this performance had some serious Oscar buzz right from the get-go at Sundance, especially the "Is this all there is" scene. I feel like so many parents and so many people in their middle age really resonated with that scene and a couple others that she's really strong in. I think it was a pretty well-deserved Oscar. I feel like you really connect with her character and how hard she's trying to make her life happen for her and her kids and how hard she needs to work for that. She wasn't really challenged either. She ended up sweeping absolutely everywhere, and she was the only Oscar left for Boyhood when Birdman stole all of its thunder in other categories. The runner-up was probably Emma Stone in Birdman, but I feel like that was pretty far from being any sort of like Oscar-winning performance. I don't think there was a really strong runner-up in this category in general. This was Emma Stone's first nomination, and it would be the first of many to come and an Oscar win. Keira Knightley for The Imitation Game. I think she was really solid in this, really deserving. It wasn't like a performance that, you know, maybe blows you away exactly, but she did like everything she needed to do. Meryl Streep for Into the Woods. That was a performance where I was like, okay, are we really going to nominate Meryl Streep for this? I watched the movie and I was like, you can nominate Meryl Streep for that. Like, she really killed it. She always kills it. These performances were all nominated pretty much everywhere, although Meryl Streep missed the BAFTA nomination. And it was another case where the fifth slot was really up in the air. People did think that Laura Dern was going to get nominated for Wild like earlier in the year, but she then failed to secure any of the precursor nominations. So people had mostly given up on her. Like, even in my head, even in my memories, I was like, oh yeah, Laura Dern got nominated with only Critics' Choice. In fact, no, she didn't even get Critics' Choice. So her nomination was actually pretty surprising because she got nominated off of nothing. However, there wasn't really like a clear number 5 that was like, oh my God, I can't believe this person wasn't nominated. It was really a question mark. I really thought Renee Russo might like squeak in there after she got that BAFTA nomination. Nightcrawler really seemed to be picking up steam at the time. Little did we know it like lost a bunch of steam. Jessica Chastain for A Most Violent Year looked like she would maybe be the only nomination for that movie. She got Globe and Critics' Choice. But ultimately, I think, you know, as we've seen in countless examples, it's just really hard to get nominated when you're the only nomination from your movie. Tilda Swinton in Snowpiercer got Critics' Choice. Bravo to the Critics' Choice for doing this. This was never going to happen at the Oscars, obviously. The BAFTAs nominated Imelda Staunton in Pride, which was pretty interesting. She's really good in that movie. And Pride was a good movie. It was a big British crowd pleaser. The Golden Globes actually nominated it, which was pretty interesting. And then we have the surprise SAG nominee, and one of the most notorious SAG surprise nominees ever. Naomi Watts in St. Vincent. I have not seen this movie, so I cannot claim much about it. But what the fuck? Like, what on earth was that? Nobody was even like talking about that. And then she just shows up at the SAG Awards. Like, don't understand what happened. They probably got their screeners out for the movie. Like, I don't know what else to say. It was like really weird. Literally 0 people predicted this on Gold Derby. That's not an exaggeration. Like, I looked. Original screenplay went to Birdman. A lot of people were being foolish on the night of the Oscars, and they thought Birdman was going to win Best Picture and Best Director, but not Screenplay. How could you say this? The stat with the Golden Globe winners winning the Oscar was pretty damn good. It also won the Critics' Choice. The only reason it didn't win WGA is because it wasn't eligible, and then that went to Grand Budapest Hotel, and Grand Budapest Hotel also won the BAFTA. To me, it seemed pretty obvious that Birdman was going to win, and also because it's such a righty movie. It's got like so many weird meta layers, very thought-provoking, purposely pretentious dialogue, very witty, it's got comedy. I don't know, I feel like it made a lot of sense to win Screenplay, and it was weird that people thought it'd be Wes Anderson. I get it though. Wes Anderson had a lot of nominations leading up to this point, and it made sense, like, oh, let's just give him Screenplay. But it was the bigger Best Picture contender. Grand Budapest Hotel, we all knew that wasn't going to win Best Picture. Boyhood, interestingly enough, was not winning very many Screenplay awards. It makes sense since Richard Linklater kind of kept rewriting the script. I mean, maybe in a way that should play into a reason why it should win. But I think that the movie felt, you know, very naturally delivered, and the Oscars maybe like the more carefully crafted writing. Although Boyhood has some banger lines at like towards the end of the movie that hit you really hard. Nightcrawler was thankfully nominated in original screenplay. It was the only category it was nominated in. It just feels like a pity nomination, really. I mean, the dialogue in this movie is great. Good dark comedy. Really glad it was at least nominated here, I guess. And the 5th nominee was Foxcatcher. Most people thought that it was going to be Selma, although Selma was written by Paul Webb. I feel like if it was written by Ava DuVernay, it might have had a better shot at getting nominated. And it didn't really get many precursors for writing. It was mostly getting like directing. But they nominated Foxcatcher, which didn't really get many precursors except for WGA. And we all know, like, with all the ineligibilities, it's not always like a huge deal. So that was a little bit surprising. But there also weren't a ton of alternatives, as we can see. Whiplash was nominated at most places because it was considered an original screenplay. The Oscars said you're adapted because you're based on a short film. So that was another factor that made the 5th slot a little like up in the air. In adapted screenplay, The Imitation Game ended up being the winner. I remember that this felt like a race between Whiplash and The Imitation Game. We all love the dialogue in Whiplash. I think that would have been a more deserving winner. I mean, it has really, really well written characters, but The Imitation Game won the WGA and the Critics' Choice for Adapted Screenplay. Whiplash wasn't really winning any precursors, so The Imitation Game looked like it was going to win on Oscar night. I think it is a really, really good script. I think it really digs deep into Alan Turing. It has really high personal and physical stakes, and the dialogue in this movie is just so snappy and witty. I think it also did a great job working in humor to the script. I actually am not really that big of a fan of this lineup overall. The Theory of Everything was just there because it was in Best Picture. That won the BAFTA for some reason. We're glad that it didn't win the Oscar. That didn't need to happen. American Sniper ended up being in there. And Inherent Vice, I mean, it was weird that this happened because the Oscars had just snubbed The Master for like everything. And so people thought, well, the Academy hates Paul Thomas Anderson. And this movie is even more divisive than The Master, so why the hell would they nominate it anywhere? It was getting a lot of nominations from critics groups, but I was not expecting it to get in at the Oscars. This lineup could have been much better if Gone Girl got in. This was a huge snub. How Inherent Vice and American Sniper made it in over Gone Girl, I will never understand. Gone Girl was nominated in the Golden Globes 5. It won the Adapted Screenplay Award at Critics' Choice. It was nominated at BAFTA and WGA. And the Oscars just fucking hated the movie for some reason. It made absolutely no sense. It felt like a minimum nomination that it would get. Like, this felt like the floor. The movie did really well at the box office. Like, everybody liked it. Critics were into it. Audiences were into it. I just don't get why they hated it so much that they couldn't even nominate it for screenplay. And people also like knew who Gillian Flynn was, and she's like adapting her own novel. Like, everybody kind of knew that narrative. And also Wild looked like it could maybe get an adapted screenplay nomination too. Got Critics' Choice from WGA. Cinematography, Birdman, it had one take. It was Emmanuel Lubezki. There was no way that anything else was going to win it. The camera work in Birdman is insane. The lighting in Birdman is insane. And if the movie is nothing else, it was an achievement in cinematography. And it was Emmanuel Lubezki's second Oscar in a row, and he would win again the next year for The Revenant. The Grand Budapest Hotel became a lock, got nominated everywhere. Mr. Turner, I'm really glad, was like kind of just in there for cinematography. People were just like, oh, this is undeniably good looking. I mean, a lot of the landscape shots looked like paintings. It's a beautiful looking movie. 3 of these nominees are not from Best Picture nominees. Unbroken was also nominated because it was Roger Deakins. And Ida was nominated at the BAFTAs, and before that, people didn't really think that Ida was going to come close to getting nominated for cinematography. But I remember making the change at the last minute for myself, and it worked out because Ida was black and white, and it was also a really, really gorgeous looking movie. It was kind of the front runner for foreign language film, and it was really great that the cinematographers branch nominated Ida. Congratulations to them. I mean, we all know the cinematographers branch loves black and white movies, but this one was truly deserved. It wasn't just nominating a black and white movie to nominate a black and white movie, although it wouldn't have been nominated if it wasn't in black and white, but it also deserved it. The big snub here was Interstellar. Ida and Unbroken beat out Interstellar, which got Critics' Choice and BAFTA nominations, did not get ASC, which was pretty weird. That was a pretty big snub, I remember. People being like, how did Interstellar not get cinematography? I don't really understand how that happened. Although the nominees, I think, are pretty good. So maybe it was just a tight race. The Imitation Game somehow was nominated to ASC. That is a little dangerously close for me. That feels like a Trial of the Chicago 7 type thing, and I'm glad it didn't actually happen. Critics groups were nominating The Immigrant, Gone Girl a little bit. I was actually surprised that with all the Instagram filterness that was going on in The Theory of Everything, that movie wasn't even remotely in the conversation. Even when the BAFTAs gave that movie like 10 nominations, they didn't even include it in cinematography. I actually think that might have been a deserved nomination for it. Best editing went to Whiplash, which is great. Whiplash was not winning editing initially. As we can see, the Critics' Choice gave editing to Birdman. Boyhood won ACE, but then Whiplash wins at BAFTA when Whiplash is also starting to win sound. So again, like, they rise together. Sound and editing rose together. And also, Whiplash had the most editing, but it wasn't the type of most editing that we normally see. Like, when you think of most editing, you think of like a race car movie or a war movie, but not necessarily a movie about someone playing the drums. But the editing in Whiplash is such a crucial tool and such a huge reason why the movie is so intense that if you even stop to think about it for a second, you know that Whiplash should win the award, which I think is why it won. Boyhood was one that people thought was in contention to win editing, especially when it was thought to be winning Best Picture. There's a lot of narrative to the editing of Boyhood, the fact that they edited it as they were shooting over the course of years, and I guess how they made this 12-year experience flow. But again, the reason Boyhood didn't win is probably that it doesn't have like quick cuts going on. Honestly, American Sniper might have been the runner-up too, because it was a war movie that won sound, and that's really all you need to say about it. Imitation Game, Grand Budapest Hotel get nominated because they're massive contenders. Birdman snubbed. Now, Birdman was getting a lot of editing nominations. It got BAFTA. It won Critics' Choice. But what editing is going on in Birdman? I mean, obviously, they're hiding certain cuts, but does that mean the editors are just stitching shots together? Like, is that the only role they have? In watching interviews with the editors, they did have an active role, like consulting with Iñárritu about the process and everything, and it looked like their expertise obviously came in handy in this movie, but it seems to me that there might not be as many integral creative decisions coming from the editors. If I was a voter, you'd probably really need to convince me that Birdman needed an editing nomination, and I'm not too surprised that it didn't get it because, again, it doesn't have a lot of cuts. And on the outside, The Theory of Everything was one that I could have seen randomly getting a nomination for sure. Nightcrawler got kind of close in the end of it, it seemed. Gone Girl was kind of a snub. Again, considering that Kirk Baxter won for David Fincher's previous 2 movies. Production design. The Grand Budapest Hotel won and it swept. I mean, once you accept that this movie is like in the Best Picture conversation, I feel like you have to give it production design. I mean, the whole thing is immaculate and playful and full of wonderful pastel colors, very creative, original work. And the Grand Budapest Hotel is just such a visually pleasing movie, and I think it's a pretty great win here. Other nominees, you have The Imitation Game because, you know, World War II era shit, Interstellar, spaceship stuff that usually gets into production design. Into the Woods had all the woodsy stuff going on, and Mr. Turner was an immaculately crafted period film. Seems like this was probably the predicted 5, though. People were probably predicting Birdman a little bit, thinking that they could throw a contemporary film in there because they did have to deal with the fact that the camera has to move between set to set in unbroken takes. That probably would have been a pretty deserved nomination too. Interestingly, Inherent Vice was nominated at Critics' Choice and as a period film at the Art Directors Guild, so that might have even gotten close. And you know, one movie I would have thrown in there is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Best costume design, the Grand Budapest Hotel. Just like with the production design, it's very goofy and silly and original. It made sense that it won with all the Best Picture hype, and also considering that it's the only Best Picture nominee in this lineup. Into the Woods might have been close to being the runner-up there. Mr. Turner gets in here too. Maleficent. And Inherent Vice was the big surprise nominee, I think, because that movie was expected to be largely ignored like they did with The Master. To get 2 nominations, they were both kind of surprises. Best Makeup and Hair. Here's another award that goes to the Grand Budapest Hotel. This award happened because Tilda Swinton was in full old people makeup, being unrecognizable. And if you're gonna win the makeup Oscar, you gotta come as close as possible to like transforming somebody's face as you can. Guardians of the Galaxy and Foxcatcher were the other nominees. Can't really tell which one would have been the runner-up. Guardians has a little bit of a Star Trek thing going on. And then Foxcatcher, of course, used a lot of prosthetics on all 3 of the main actors, I think. It's actually like a little weird how much effort they actually put into the makeup in Foxcatcher. Like most period dramas don't really go there. But I do think that extra step was really needed for at least Steve Carell's character, for him to become unrecognizable and a little more eerie for the audience. And on the shortlist, they had Theory of Everything, Maleficent, Amazing Spider-Man 2, and Noah. And then off the shortlist, things that were snubbed for the shortlist, Into the Woods was the most surprising one, because if you look at what they did with Meryl Streep throughout the movie, and if you look at, you know, Johnny Depp and whatever was going on with his wolf thing, that looked like it was going to make a lot of sense. Original Score. This is the 4th award that goes to the Grand Budapest Hotel. This was Alexander Desplat's first Oscar. It was really a continuation and expansion of what Alexander Desplat did on Wes Anderson's previous films, Fantastic Mr. Fox and Moonrise Kingdom. I think this is a really, really great win. The score in Grand Budapest Hotel is so fun and bouncy, full of like interesting, quirky, weird melodies. But people didn't think this was going to win score for quite a while. In fact, it wasn't even nominated at the Golden Globes and the Critics' Choice Awards, because people were kind of content, I guess, saying, well, Desplat's getting nominated for The Imitation Game and that's that. And maybe Grand Budapest Hotel took a little while to warm up. I mean, in retrospect, like, it makes a ton of sense that it was nominated and that it won. The only place that it won other than the Oscar was at BAFTA, and they didn't even nominate The Imitation Game. So I guess once you have the idea that like the Grand Budapest Hotel should win score, then you have to follow up on that. I don't know why people didn't have this idea earlier on. The Golden Globes gave it to Theory of Everything, which I don't really think is on the same level as Johan Johansson's other films that he did with like Denis Villeneuve, but it's still a good score. A lot of people thought that that one was going to win. Interstellar is like an all-timer, incredible score. I guess kind of interesting that it wasn't really in the winning conversation. I remember watching The Imitation Game in theaters. 5 minutes in, I hear the score and I'm like, that's just getting nominated. Like, that's just easy. There's no way around it. And then a huge shocker here. This is like one of the most surprising tech nominations that I've ever witnessed, is Mr. Turner sneaking into Best Score. Critics groups were not really going for this. It really is like a rando pick. It's actually a really strange score. Like, it has classical instrumentation, but it's very eerie. I mean, I remember really appreciating the score, but it doesn't like pop out in the way that you'd expect from an Oscar nominated score. Totally rando nomination, but I really like am not opposed to it, although I would have been also satisfied if one of these other films got in. Gone Girl was a huge snub. That was the predicted number 5. Easily. It was just yet another category that the Oscars snubbed Gone Girl in for absolutely no reason. Birdman would have been nominated had that been eligible, and it was not. The Academy has that annoying rule that says that if the use of pre-existing music dilutes the original score, then it's not eligible. And so Birdman has a lot of classical pieces that it uses in the movie, and the score itself is pretty much just all drumming. This is an instance where, like, if you told voters, like, hey, let's just make sure everybody knows that only the drumming really counts as the score, they'd probably be like, okay, cool, I'm still nominating it. And I feel like most people kind of knew that. So sort of annoying that that wasn't able to get in. Honestly, that might have been competitive for the win if it got in too. It's a really creative way to compose a film, an iconic score that was very unsurprisingly overlooked. Under the Skin. This is one of the best experimental film scores of, I guess, like the modern era. It feels right that at least Mika Levi was nominated for Jackie, and that was somewhat of like a consolation for this. Critics groups were nominating this a lot because it was kind of a no-brainer. Even if you don't like the movie, you know that the score is good shit. And it was really interesting that the BAFTAs actually did nominate this. Good for them. Original song, Glory from Selma. I mean, the song is basically just encapsulating like the point of the movie, and it's done by Common. It's the only Best Picture nominee here. It was pretty obvious that this would win. I don't know if I have a ton to say about the song category, honestly, but when Everything Is Awesome got nominated after we knew that they snubbed the Lego Movie, it was just like, oh, so you like... You know it's there, and then you refuse to acknowledge it. And you do have a Diane Warren song in here, Grateful from Beyond the Lights, which is why that was nominated. Sound editing went to American Sniper. I mean, you know, it's a war movie, hard to compete against. This is a year where it did seem like they understood the difference between sound editing and mixing, though I think Interstellar probably should have won over American Sniper. Unbroken had the plane crash scene, which really solidified those sound nominations. Birdman was nominated in both sound categories, and I'm sure they had to get creative with the sound, but it's also just an example of how much the Academy liked Birdman that they were nominating it in sound. And The Hobbit got a sound nomination. There were a lot of runner-ups that you could have had here, like Fury, which was a war movie, Planet of the Apes, Imitation Game. People did think Guardians of the Galaxy was going to get it, but the lesson that we've learned here is that unless you're Black Panther, you cannot get a sound nomination as a Marvel movie. We learned this time and time again. And this year they did understand that Whiplash was mixing and not editing. Whiplash won sound mixing. Also a really interesting win, especially for a film that has such a low budget to be winning technical categories. American Sniper was probably runner-up, and then you had, you know, Interstellar, Birdman, Imitation Game, and Budapest Hotel got the sound nomination at BAFTA. And people thought Into the Woods was going to get nominated, even though it didn't really have precursor support, because they thought, well, because it's a musical, they will nominate it for sound mixing. Visual effects went to Interstellar. This was a battle between Interstellar and the Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes has always come close to winning visual effects with all three of the movies. Lost to Hugo, lost to Interstellar, lost to Blade Runner 2049. The Oscars do really like their space stuff and their sci-fi movies though. And so that's why even though Interstellar only won BAFTA, it won the Oscar. And then you had 3 Marvel films. I don't know if X-Men counts as Marvel or not, but I guess it's close enough. In fact, The Hobbit was nominated everywhere, so that was a pretty shocking snub. Winter Soldier was not nominated anywhere. And Maleficent got VES, so that seemed possible. And then Godzilla, like for some reason, was completely ignored, even though that had really good visual effects and it was a pretty good movie. Godzilla definitely should have been nominated. Birdman did not make the shortlist, but it won the supporting award at the Visual Effects Society. Best animated feature. So Big Hero 6's win was pretty random, but it was also because people were confused as fuck because they didn't know what to do. Because they snubbed the goddamn Lego Movie. This is one of the most insane Oscar snubs that we've ever had. Like, the best animated movie of the year. Completely surprised everybody. Got great critic reviews. And then it's just completely absent from the Oscar lineup, causing waves of confusion throughout the world. The Lego Movie was supposed to win. And I think if it was nominated, it would have won. It won Critics' Choice, PGA, and BAFTA. How to Train Your Dragon 2 seemed to be the runner-up because it won Golden Globe and Annie. In fact, most people were predicting How to Train Your Dragon 2 to win, which is a really, really visually stunning movie. I'm not sure I personally felt the story was like all that. And I haven't even seen Big Hero 6, but it didn't win anywhere, and it won the Oscar because people didn't know what to do. I guess they didn't really want to give it to a sequel. The other picks here, you look at the Box Trolls and you're like, how does the Box Trolls get in over the Lego Movie? Nothing against it, but it's like, you know, one is clearly like more of a big deal. Song of the Sea and Princess Kaguya make sense because those are like the indie picks, and this is when the animated feature branch was voted on by people who worked in animation. And they used to go for picks like that all the time, and I guess they picked that over the Lego Movie. This wouldn't have happened if they had the voting system that they do now, which is that anybody can vote for animated feature. And the Lego Movie's snub here is very possibly part of the reason why they made that rule change. Song of the Sea and Kaguya were only really nominated at Annie, where there was like a lot of slots. They weren't getting Golden Globe and Critics' Choice, PGA, or BAFTA. Those groups were actually nominating The Book of Life. You know, I like that the animated feature branch reaches outside and goes for like some international picks that are more indie. You know, they just didn't have to do it at the expense of Lego Movie. Citizen 4 won documentary. This is about Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden's name was like a lot more in the public conversation around this time, and this was like a really important documentary about his work. And so when you have a documentary that is important and relevant and also very good, then it makes sense that the Academy likes to get behind that. They're kind of awarding and endorsing like the message of the documentary and the subject. And then a movie that people thought might win but wasn't nominated was Life Itself, which is the documentary about Roger Ebert, whose passing only happened the year before. And that was a pretty good Ebert documentary, and it would have made a lot of sense for the film industry to kind of honor Roger Ebert himself and his life and his legacy. And so when that wasn't nominated, it was really surprising because it seemed obvious why they would want to nominate that. And that movie won Critics' Choice and PGA, so if it was nominated, it probably would have been pretty competitive with Citizen 4 for the win. Virunga was one of the first films that Netflix had done that had been nominated. They actually kind of started their whole campaigning by getting in documentaries like The Square and Virunga, and then they moved on to feature films. It looks like The Overnighters was a pretty big snub here too. Foreign language film, Ida. It's a really good win. People were predicting this to win, but I remember really wondering and kind of hoping if that Leviathan could win, because that's from Andrzej Zvyagintsev, and I really like his movies, and that was one of my favorites this year. Leviathan won a Golden Globe, and then Force Majeure from Ruben Östlund won the Critics' Choice. And that was the big snub on Oscar morning, was that Force Majeure was not nominated here. There's always going to be at least one big snub in the foreign film category, but this lineup overall is very good. Timbuktu is also a good movie and was one of the most acclaimed of the year in general. Wild Tales, I really love. That's one of the best anthology movies that I've ever seen. And finally, movies that were nominated for no Oscars. Palme d'Or winner Winter Sleep, which is a very good movie. Mommy, which is easily one of my favorites from that year. Force Majeure, which we just mentioned. Under the Skin is probably the most acclaimed movie of the year that wasn't nominated for anything. The Babadook. Snowpiercer. I really like the movie Frank. Most Violent Year got nothing. Edge of Tomorrow didn't get anything, including visual effects. Life Itself, Love is Strange, Pride, Calvary, The Immigrant. There were a lot of good movies. I don't know exactly where to cut this list off. And that concludes our 2014 Oscars retrospective. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Would you have voted for Boyman or Birdhood?